Thanks, Michelle. I'm just checking to make sure you can hear us. And again, apologies for the delay in getting started. I'd like to welcome Minister Paschal Donohoe, a man probably needs no introduction to the audience here this evening, but has had many responsibilities, including obviously right now Public Expenditure, Reform and the National Development Plan. So thank you very much, I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Mark. A pleasure to be with you.
Brilliant. Well, look, quite obviously, in the run-up to a budget and an election in the next number of months, there's some obvious questions people will ask. Let's get them out of the way.
Yeah.
So what can people expect? What can you give us in terms of a clue of what you might be unveiling in your budget coming up soon?
Well, we've already talked publicly about what some of the priorities will be. It will be about how we can use this budget to be able to help in particular with the challenges that people are facing today, but also, really importantly, trying to invest and be safe about our future as well. So the room that you're sitting in at the moment, Mark, for the benefit of all your viewers, is in the meeting room of the Department of Public Expenditure. And I'll be meeting every minister in this room in the coming days, one after the other, and I'll agree the budget with them. So it will all happen here, and it'll be a busy number of weeks, but they're the key aims of the budget.
Yeah. Well, obviously, with practice solicitors around the country, they're either small business owners themselves, they work for firms, or they work in-house in an awful lot of organisations. I think from a business perspective, what do you think that they can expect in this budget?
The continued focus that we have on having a growing economy, and a growing economy with a really high level of employment that in turn is capable of generating the demand for the services that your members supply when it comes to the commercial world, when it comes to the business world. I think we do need to be careful, though it is always the prism through which budgets are viewed, about asking what can any one budget do for me. The truth is, if we're ever at a place that a single budget makes such a gigantic difference to where somebody is or a country is, and we're probably doing the kind of budget that we shouldn't be doing. It's about phased, steady improvements, and this budget is the latest in a series of budgets that will be doing that, despite the many challenges that we've had to face and get over, and despite the volatility and many challenges the world is clearly grappling with.
Yeah. I saw earlier this week in the Financial Times, Jared Brady in the Financial Times made the point that Ireland doesn't have a problem of money. It's plenty of money, but actually making a real impact and producing, whether it be housing or other areas for people in those circumstances is really the issue. And you see that as the overall picture as well.
I would differ from him in relation to it, because it implies that the money that we have at the moment isn't capable of making an impact. And if you look at where we are with housing supply, if you look at where we are with really important infrastructure such as the National Broadband Plan, all of that has been driven by a huge increase in capital investment that has happened in recent years. When I started here in this role, and if I look at where we are now, capital investment has tripled in our economy, tripled. It's doubled in the last few years, and all of that is having an impact on where we are today. But what Jared was pointing to in the article, as we're all aware of, is our public finances continue to be very healthy. And the question is, how can we use the funding and money that will be available to us to continue the progress that we're making at the moment, and then make some bigger decisions about our future. But this budget will be one in a series of budgets that is aiming to do that. And for such an audience such as your own, I think we do need to guard against the feeling that any one budget is capable of making an instantaneous change to conditions or issues that people are concerned about.
Which is a nice link to the longer term, which is, as I understand, this is your 9th budget, probably 11th year, as I understand it, as a minister. And there's been a lot of changes in Ireland in that time. What do you think you've learned from that budgetary process over those 9 years, and as a minister over 11, that really we should take as your lessons from this, and maybe what you do differently?
Oh my God, we could probably get an entire evening out of that particular question, Mark. There's an awful lot in it. I think I'll just answer from a budgetary point of view, because all the other things I've learned will have us here for a while. From a budgetary point of view, it is that the focus that I've had in saying you never know what is around the corner in terms of the need to be running surpluses in our public finances And the fact that on two separate occasions we've moved back into surplus, I always did that with a sense of we need to be ready for what the future may bring. But I didn't anticipate what the future may bring was going to be a pandemic. And then the effect of the first major war to happen in Europe for many decades. So on one hand, I have learned that the unexpected can bring challenges that you really can't forecast. But more positively, I've also learned that the unexpected can bring benefits and a level of performance that you can't forecast either. Because we have now seen two recoveries in recent years alone. The first one from the pandemic, the second one from a surge in inflation that pretty much most economic forecasters said wouldn't happen, and it did.
Yeah.
So I've learned the uncertainty is a source of benefit and risk.
Which brings us neatly to the election as well. I mean, everyone's expecting election, if not in weeks and months. And I think immigration and housing seem to be the two significant topics in the political world at the moment. Do you expect those to be the focus of the budget, of the election, or do you think there are other issues that you, Fine Gael, and the government will focus on?
Well, what I've also learned is that whatever you want an election to focus on is not the same as what you want as a government would want it to focus on at times, or even an opposition party. Elections, once they are called, acquire a dynamic and a momentum of their own. So I'd be pretty humble in terms of forecasting what would be the issues the elections will be focused on. If the election was happening immediately, the issues that you've raised, no doubt, would be central to it. And indeed, they are indeed intertwined. And of course, from a budgetary perspective, I'll be making the point that the 5 budgets that the government will have done since then would have played a role in helping our country get to a better place with regard to those issues. And, you know, the very broad point that keeps on needing to be made again and again is that if you look at the economic history of Ireland, at most points in our history, when we got hit by a really profound external shock, whether it was the global financial crisis, whether it's currency difficulties, our public finances tended to be a multiplier of that shock, tended to amplify and deepen that shock within our domestic economy. And the last 5 years, we faced 2 major shocks, and the opposite has happened. We've used our public finances to support our economy, to support your clients, to support our society. And we've done that because we've become creditworthy again, and because the rest of the world sees us as running budget surpluses. And that is an approach that has worked in the last few years. And I think there's a really strong case for saying it can work again.
I think certainly in the political world at the moment, there seems to be a growing sense of pressure, intimidation, if not even abuse or attacks on politicians. And we're seeing that in the legal side. There were immigration lawyers who were simply being threats against them in the last number of weeks simply because of the work that they do on behalf of their clients. Is that something you think, in terms of a political point of view and just the attacks on democracy here, do you feel that that is something that we can solve in the next while? And what do you think we might be able to do in something like that?
Of course we can, but one of the ways in which we can solve it and moderate the impact of it is by calibrating the level of intimidation and of abuse against the wider way in which the public see politicians. Is there intimidation? Is there attempts made to abuse and to threaten politicians? Yes, unfortunately that happens. It's happening with growing frequency. But the overwhelming majority of people treat their politicians in a way I think is perfectly civil and very appropriate. And I think it's really worth making that point, Mark, because you run the risk then of creating a discourse around politics that is very unhealthy and not in line with the reality of it, and ultimately will act as a deterrent to people wanting to become politicians. I think politics is a great thing to do. It's really enjoyable most of the time. It's highly rewarding nearly all of the time. And I would encourage anybody to try to become a politician.
So it brings, I mean, that's a really interesting way to say, well, why did you get involved at the start, and why Fine Gael as well?
So as always, a lot of this is related, Mark, to kind of place and people. And for me, when I was a young adult, the local politician in my area was Austin Curry.
Mm.
And Austin was an incredibly substantial, experienced, and like really serious politician. Um, and that had a really big effect on how I viewed Fine Gael, and ultimately he was the reason I joined. Have you watched Succession?
I have a Succession.
Do you know that final scene of it all? Now, this could be a spoiler effect for any of your viewers who haven't watched Succession.
They can shoot out of it.
When the patriarch asks his fat children, are they serious? Are they serious people?
Yeah.
Austin Curry was a really serious person. And he had a really big effect then on how I viewed Fine Gael. And I joined May in a large part because of him. And then I've stayed because it continues to be, as I said, most of the time good fun,
Yeah.
and always a source of big meaning.
He was he had many chapters to his life as well, of course, in terms of very huge advocate of civil rights in Northern Ireland over in when it.
Yeah, and like his autobiography, and which is a really interesting book, speaks earlier on to the point that you made. I mean, if a figure like him can deal with the level of abuse, difficulty, and threat, and he still believed in the value and role of politics, has to send a signal to us then regarding why politics is so worth practicing and the role of it. And as he said, an incredibly storied and formidable politician who had such a big effect on this island, and I was really lucky to know.
Sounds really impressive. And again, we've probably all had that person in our lives.
Of course.
Interesting to hear. I think many of our members as well, it'd be interesting to know from, obviously, they're all lawyers practicing the law in their different ways. I mean, but in the justice system, what does justice mean to you?
So justice above all to me means impartiality. It means regardless of who you are, where you've come from, and what your views are, that you're equal in front of the law. And justice means many different things to different people, and there's lots of things that I think of when I do think of justice. But if I was to pick one quality of that concept that I think is particularly important, given the challenges that democracies can face, is that all are equal in front of the law.
And you won't be surprised if for the first time, me saying it, but that the underfunding of the justice system, legal aid, criminal legal aid, civil legal aid, and various other things, which you will be considering, I know, as part of this budget. Do you feel any light at the end of the tunnel in terms of restoring those sort of fundings that were taken away during the economic crisis a decade ago? And how do you see the funding of the justice system in the future?
Well, funding to the Department of Justice has gone up by 22% over the last number of years. It's gone up by €400 million. And the funding for free legal aid for very valuable programs like that, I think it's gone up by nearly 40% in the last few years. So what I accept is always an issue of, does funding meet demand? And that is a familiar challenge that most public services face. Underfunding could infer lack of funding or no increases in funding. And the programs that I know are important to many of your members have gone up in value and in spending terms by nearly 40%. But I can assure you that when I'm meeting the Minister for Justice, meeting Helen in the next few days, she always continues to press these programs and the importance of them. And we always try to find ways in which we can make more funding available. But that is the work that we'll be doing in the next few days.
Exactly. And we look forward to hearing more about that in the budget and further afield as well, I'm sure. I think in the broader context then, I mean, what do you think the government expects from the legal profession in the context of justice and the legal system in this country?
Well, to adhere to the values and to the standards that your members, I know, do want to adhere to and you expect of them. I go back to the importance of impartiality, of all being equal in front of the law, and to discharging your duties in an ethical and timely manner, which I know are values and issues that are very important to the society and to your members anyway. So that's an obvious and expected expectation that I would have. And then in addition to that, if I was to raise one economic matter, it's just to be aware of how your work is done and the effect that it can have on the competitiveness and the economic standing of the state. But those kind of expectations are the expectations that we would have of any important profession within our state.
Look, and there's a huge transformation of the profession over the last 25
Yeah.
years or more, which very much tracks the economic trajectory of the country. I mean, you have a huge part of the profession now which services the multinational, international segment. Almost 25% going to 30% soon of the profession is in-house, servicing multinationals, domestic, public sector organizations. And then there's also, of course, that community-based legal services in many counties around every community around the country. And certainly that sector in particular is challenged slightly, whether it be GPs or large practice, veterinary practices and so on. So certainly in terms of rural development and support of professional services in rural communities and around the country, that's something I think the profession would be very keen. And I think that's probably part of the budgetary and ongoing perspective as well.
Indeed, very much so. And I know that your members provide services and supports that come in many different shapes and sizes and now reflect the complexity and diversity of our economy. Whether you're in-house, whether you're a sole practitioner in maybe a smaller town or village, you're providing an essential element of how our state needs to function.
Look, I may be moving from the local to the more international side of things as well. I mean, be interested to, you've taken on the role as president of Europe, the European level. First of all, why did you take on that role, and what do you think Ireland gets from you playing that role?
Oh, I stood for that role in 2020, and I've been privileged to continue to do it. I aimed to hold that office and win it because it's enormously interesting, and because by how you work with other ministers, you're going to have an effect on where Europe stands on really important issues. In terms of what Ireland gets out of it, at the very least, what we get out of it is a far deeper understanding of economic issues that are developing within Europe and across the world. And by that deeper understanding, a better appreciation of what is the national response back to it. So it is at times a subtle but still very important dimension of what I do. And it's been a phenomenal experience, something I work very, very hard at. But I hope with even more to come in terms of how I can hold that office and the effect it can have.
I think the first ministerial office you held was the Minister for European Affairs, and obviously, so you've been involved in the EU level for quite some time. But all through that as well, we've come a long way, maybe from the economic boom, where perhaps we might have damaged our reputation at the European level by the likes of sending Dustin Baturkey to Eurovision, right through to the economic crash. But we had to lean into the relationship at the European level. How do you think our European partners see us now as a country?
I hope they see us as a very serious-minded country that takes our responsibilities to public service and to the European Union very seriously. I was in Brussels yesterday and I saw very tangible evidence of this in terms of the quality of the MEPs that we now have. And I'm reminded now in terms of the number of roles at an economic level within the European Union that Ireland holds. You could look at Mairead McGuinness, our current commissioner. You would look at Philip Lane within the ECB. You would look at Sharon Donnery. You would look at myself. These are all important roles that we have in the European dimension of the European Union that are held by Irish people. So I hope by where Irish people are, by the number of us, that it is an indicator to it that we take our responsibility with the European Union very seriously.
And I suppose the government has some concerns that we're not seeing enough Irish officials maybe make their way into the system. I'm sure lawyers have ample skills to be active in that space. Would you encourage
very much
lawyers
so.
to apply for those roles and do national service?
I think they want to do it for reasons other than national service as well. These are very interesting and good roles to do, Mark. And I would encourage anybody to do them. And debate that we are having about where we are with people holding roles in a few years' time, and the fact that we're thinking about that I hope indicates how seriously we see this work in the first place.
And do you think the European Union is a different place now without the UK?
Oh, very different.
Mm.
Very different because we lost the G7 economy from the European Union. We lost a country of importance and standing within the world. And it has very much influenced the kind of European Union that we have now. And of course, the UK is a very different country by it not being in the European Union. But that then goes back to the issue that you raised a moment ago with me about the importance of the influence that we have, people we send, and the work that we do.
And do you think Ireland is finding it harder to make headway at a European level without UK as an ally, as it has been on many occasions?
I think we work really hard to make sure that doesn't happen. But certainly the benefit that we would have enjoyed by being able to associate our interests with a very large country is evidently gone. And we need to work a lot harder with allies in order to make progress on issues that we believe are in our national interest.
Do you think the UK will ever rejoin?
I don't see that happening in our political lifetime. I don't think that will happen. The United Kingdom have made a choice. I think before we get to that point, though, I do think there are many opportunities for the United Kingdom and the European Union to get closer and closer because we agree on far more than we differ. And then beyond our political lifetimes or other lifetimes, indeed, Mark.
We're getting very philosophical now.
Well, I go back to what I said earlier on. Can't rule anything in or out.
Yeah.
And you really never know across the long span of how a project like the European Union could evolve, how it could turn into, what it could turn into, and its relationship with the UK. You know, I do believe the arc of how the UK will evolve over many decades to come will bring it closer and closer back to the European Union.
It's a really interesting perspective. And do you think the mood music has changed under the Starmer government than the previous Conservative administrations at this stage?
Well, the mood music and tone has definitely changed. But that being said, you know, they have very specific priorities for what they want to do and a lot of work to do that they themselves have laid out in terms of their economy and in terms of their public services and the issues that they have identified that they want to make progress on, Mark. Recognition of standards, mobility of artists, agricultural recognition issues. They're very specific issues, all of which will help, but clearly a lot more awaits. But it's up to the British government themselves, indeed, to decide if they want to do that.
And there's so much happening on the international scene that has an impact here on Ireland, and obviously we're looking to have that impact internationally as well. Obviously, I know you keep a broad perspective on things. I'll just be interested to get your observations on what's happening in the US elections at the moment and what your hopes, perhaps, or even predictions might be over the coming weeks.
Well, my hopes are obviously the government of Ireland will work closely with whoever the people of America elect to be their president. And what I would hope is when that decision is made, it leads to a period of stability within American politics. Would
you be confident of that?
I would be hopeful. Would I be confident? Yes. But we all have to recognise the very solemn and serious event that was January the 6th. What we all recognise is the really powerful role that America plays in the politics, the security, the economic order of the world. And a stable and forward-looking America is really important to all of that. So America will elect who they want as their next president. America, Ireland, Europe will work with that president. And I believe what is also very important is the prospect of a continued period of stability in America. So we have the opportunity to continue to work with them. And obviously the aftermath of the election will be very important.
I see somebody who's very familiar with Ireland has just become Prime Minister of France, Michel Barnier. That seems to be, I think, an opportunity, I hope, for Ireland. Do you see it that way as well?
I do indeed, but thankfully our relationship with the President Macron and with his recent governments, has been so strong. Great to see that the Taoiseach was only in Paris there last week, and it's a real example of how our relationship with, as they would say, our nearest country with neighbour within the European Union, how that has got stronger and stronger, and I'm sure President and Prime Minister Barnier offers an opportunity to bring that only closer.
Very good. Glad to see that they're willing to ignore that body of water between us and just and embrace the idea of neighbourhood in that context.
But I see that kind of neighbourhood very much in the context of the European Union, rather than defined by geography, Mark.
Even better. I suppose just get maybe a personal perspective in terms of where do you think the country will be in 10 years' time? There's a lot that's happened in the last 10 years. And the uncertainty and I suppose crises that we've gone through that you mentioned earlier. What do you see for the next 10 years, and where do you think we'll be in that 10 years? And how do you think that people who run small businesses and legal firms and involved in organisations right around the country can prepare for that future?
So much of that does depend on the assumptions that you make regarding where the world will be. I really hope for all of our sakes we can make the assumption that there would be a resolution to the 3 wars that are taking place at the moment. We would all obviously want those resolutions to be ones that are based on consent and closer to international law and how these issues should be adhered to. But that is always incredibly hard to do. If you look at what's happening in Sudan, if you look at what's happening in Gaza, and if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, a future in which those wars persist is obviously on many different levels for us and for the rest of the world, a future that will be more and more challenging. But if we make the assumption that over a 10-year period, and well before then, I would hope, that those wars were to come to an end and be resolved, and obviously particularly for the people of Ukraine, I hope it can be resolved in a way that respects them. What do I think that world will look like? It'll be a warmer world, tragically. It will be a world in which artificial intelligence is playing a bigger role. And it will be a world in which we will continue to see other parts of the world, from the perspective of Europe, continue to look to project and exert their influence, whether that be the role of China, whether that be the role of very strong, very fast growing economies in Asia and the Middle East. That is a world which will be more multipolar than the world that we would have experienced a decade ago.
Mm-hmm.
So what can that mean for Ireland? Well, it could and should mean a greener Ireland. It should mean an Ireland that is now economically benefiting from exporting green energy to the rest of the world. And it should and could mean an Ireland economically that is making better use of the digital technologies that by that point will, in all likelihood, will have transformed how our economies operate. So I think that's a world of amazing opportunity for Ireland. It is a world in which I think it is possible for us to make the kind of progress over a decade that we have made since the 1990s. But above all, I hope that it is a society within which our kids want to flourish in, and in which it is a society that values diversity and continues to adhere to the values that matter in communities and parishes in Ireland. I believe we can aspire to that, and I believe we can make it happen.
You sound optimistic about the future.
I'm extremely optimistic. I mean, I'm very optimistic by nature. Cynicism and pessimism don't play much of a role in my outlook on the world, and in how the tone in which I think we should conduct ourselves. So I am very optimistic. but I'm not naive. I have a real sense of what is happening at the moment outside of Ireland. And also as somebody who's been a Minister for Finance for some time now, I'm extremely aware of the competitive pressure that we face and the economic volatility that surrounds us. So I am an optimist for reasons of fact and for reasons of personality, but I'm also a realist as well. And I think we have to recognise, yes, the opportunities, but also the difficulties that are increasingly tangible to our society and to our world.
Maybe just two questions to finish up.
Yeah.
So what you asked about maybe where Ireland will be in 10 years' time. Where do you think Paschal Donohoe will be in 10 years' time?
Well, if I talked about the dangers of forecasting and predicting what might happen in a few weeks and months, Mark, ahead, I think I'd be equally kind of careful about making the same prediction about myself.
You think you'll still be in politics?
In a decade's time? Oh, I think it is. I want to be in politics for as far into my own future as I can currently commit to and can see. Despite the many predictions that have been made with great certainty about me, I want to continue in politics. I'll be contesting the next general election in Dublin Central, and I want to see this government re-elected, and I hope to play a role in making that happen. My aspirations and aims for where I want to be in a decade's time are more about myself kind of on a personal level and how I want to be and what I want to be doing. But as far into the future as I can see, I want to focus on politics. I still hugely enjoy doing it. Mm-hmm. I find it rewarding and fun most of the time. And I have an awful lot to do, yes, an awful lot to do.
Sure will be. We'll be back perhaps talking on another occasion, but maybe just to wrap up, I mean, you're on many an occasion, you've reviewed books, you're giving recommendations for books and podcasts and various other things. I'm just wondering, how do you juggle all of this reading, all of this work, your European role as well as your Irish, and obviously clearly a young and active family as well. So there's lots going on there. And any advice on that side in terms of how to juggle? And secondly, what are the recommendations for a bit of reading between now and Christmas?
I'm the last person to give advice on any personal matters now in terms of managing priorities or life, so I won't do that. There's only two reasons why I keep everything going. I have an amazing team who I work very closely with, who manage so much on my behalf, and I have an exceptional department with really great civil servants within it. And then the secret about reading is, I'm afraid, a very prosaic and banal and boring one, Mark. I read every night. And that's all I do, sometimes late at night, but I read every night for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And sure, if you do that night after night after night, for all your life, you do begin to read a lot of books. And what am I reading at the moment? I'm rereading Brooklyn by Colm Tobey, because I'm about to read Long Island, his latest book. And I thought that before I start Long Island, which in some ways is a sequel to Brooklyn, I should go back to a book that I read a long time ago. So I'm reading that at the moment and nearly have it finished. And then I'll be moving on to Long Island next. So that's it. What about you? What are you reading, Mark?
What am I reading? Podcasts are my thing.
Okay, what do you enjoy?
I'm in I've actually, the rest is history, the rest is politics, the rest is football is my sequence in that context. But I've also, Empire is a really interesting one.
Oh my God.
Which is
Empire is particularly heavyweight, isn't it now? That's Dalrymple, isn't it?
It is Dalrymple, and he's pretty impressive, I've got to say. And he's Annan as well, who's been absolutely fantastic. But I skip between them all, and of course we have Scaramucci has now started with the West is Politics.
I started listening to that.
I have, and it's very impressive.
Cassie Kay
as well, and it's great dynamic as well, I've got to say, and takes me out to a different world every now and then,
which we all need, Mark. We all need.
Absolutely. Well, look, I appreciate, as we've touched on only a small number of things
not at all, Mark,
involved in. Really do appreciate you taking the time, and I know our members and our sisters right around the country will appreciate that as well. And best of luck with all your great decisions you have to make in the weeks ahead, and I know the election will be on shortly as well. So thank you very
Delighted,
much.
Mark, and good luck to you and all of your members in your work.
Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, and thank you for bearing with us. We actually lost nobody on that call, so I really do appreciate you staying with us, and thank you very much, Minister and indeed Mark. We're going to sign off here from the Law Society until the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye now.